Welcome. My name is Jeremiah Sunarine, and today we will be looking at how can we use a model to compare fractions with the same numerator. Here are the standards that we'll be discussing today, and we'll jump right into the lesson. In this module, Module 5, Day 35, again, we're going to be looking at how can we use a model to compare fractions with the same numerator. So before we get into the lesson, we're going to go over some math vocabulary. We're going to be looking at, in this lesson, comparing fractions with the same numerator, and how can we determine which one's greater and which one is less. So in order for students to understand this, we need to make sure we emphasize some vocabulary such as numerator and denominator. Emphasizing this in our lessons and continually using this math vocabulary, it will be important for students to make a connection and understand the lesson. So numerator is how many equal parts do you have, and denominator, how many equal parts is the whole divided into. Using some visuals as well as the written fraction will be very important for students to grasp not only the vocabulary, but their meaning. Now we're going to get into a launch. So the first question we can pose to students is, Erica ate 2/9 of a licorice stick. Robbie ate 2/5 of an identical licorice stick. Who ate more? This would be a good time for our students to read the question, or if you're reading it to them, read it to them, asking them what's important, what information will help us solve the problem, and it can allow for students to practice using their annotation skills. They can underline, highlight different parts of the problem, and this could be a really great skill for them to understand in order to read other story problems. In this example, you can also guide students to write each fraction. Here we see that Erica ate 2/9, asking students how can we write that as a fraction, as well as Robbie, who ate 2/5, how can we write 2/5 as a fraction? Having students write down the fraction will be very helpful so that they can see the two different fractions and compare which one could be larger, which one could be smaller. The last piece, which is very important, is using visual models. Visual models are important because it determines if they can develop it on their own, or if you need to provide it for them. So if you know your students, if they're having trouble developing and drawing out a licorice stick, in this case, they would want to draw like a long figure of a long model and divide it into 5 pieces and 9 pieces. If that might be difficult for them to do on their own, you can provide a model for them so that they don't struggle with this concept, and then they can really just jump into answering the question. On the next slide, we're going to show like a visual model, and I'm going to show you how you can use that to guide the discussion and learning in that. Here, we have the same question. Now we have a visual. Notice how in Erica's model it's cut into 9 pieces, and Robbie is cut into 5 pieces. Erica has 2 shaded pieces, Robbie has 2 shaded pieces. We have the fractions here, and we have a written response. Robbie ate more because 2 units of fifths is 2/5 is more than 2 units of 2/9. Now, for some students, they might look at this and this might be just enough to get them to the point to know which fraction is larger and understand that Robbie ate more. However, some guiding questions I've provided over here can help us with students who might need a little more assistance in getting to this point. So some questions and considerations for students are, which fraction is larger? And they can use the model to help guide them. What number is the denominator? Which fraction is smaller? What number is the denominator? And by doing this, we can have students develop their own thoughts around how to determine which fraction is larger and smaller based on the denominator and use examples to reinforce this. So by having them answer some of these questions, they can identify that 2/9 is the smaller fraction, 2/5 is the larger fraction. Then we can have them develop, what can we say based on the fraction. And the key here is looking at the denominator and seeing if they can figure it out on their own. And if they can develop something, we can use additional examples to test their idea to see if it makes sense. We're going to go into another question and without modifications, and then you'll see what we could do to guide our students. In this example, we're talking about John ran 2/3 of a kilometer after school. Nicholas ran 2/5 of a kilometer after school. Who ran the shorter distance? Use the model below to support your answer. Be sure to label one hole as 1 kilometer. So in this example, we may see that this might be not enough information to support our students. However, we as special educators can manipulate the question in a way that can guide students and help them learn this concept and for their thinking. So I'm going to show you some strategies. Here in the first example, we can think about annotating the problem. Color coding and underlining are good strategies. We can do this on their own, or we can model it for them. Notice how John is associated with yellow, and we have a model that has yellow. Nicholas is associated with red, and we have a model that looks like that as well. I underline the question that we need to figure out: who ran the shorter distance? Having certain keys to the question, such as underlining what the question is, can help us in determining what we need to find out. Another strategy is models. Use color-coded to help us with this, just like yellow is John, red is Nicholas, and also if you notice, I labeled 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, same thing with the 1/5. This can be very helpful for students who need help with the fractions noticing how it's in equal parts. And lastly, we want our students to really elaborate on their answers and write a complete sentence. So you can provide a sentence starters when they do figure out the answer to this problem. Who ran the shorter distance? We don't want to say that just Nicholas. We want to encourage students to write in complete sentences. So we would say Nicholas ran the shorter distance. Or you can have Nicholas ran the shorter distance compared to John. And this can help them with their vocabulary and writing skills. Lastly, we're going to do summarization. So in looking at how can we use a model to compare fractions with the same numerator, here are some guiding points that we want the learning to take place with our students. To emphasize, a model can help us visualize the given fraction and compare between different fractions to see which fraction is larger and which is smaller. Asking students when they compare fractions with the same numerator, how can they determine the smaller fraction and larger fraction based on the denominator? And I provided some examples here to help guide us with that. Here, there's not enough information in this visual, but maybe this might be very helpful for some students, the visual, to get it on their own. The second example provides more explicit instruction and visuals and breaking down the problem into smaller pieces. And this might be very helpful for students to figure it out on their own, or you can guide them by reading the pieces here, reading the sentences, or having them read it and asking them targeted questions so that they can come up with a rule, determine which fraction is larger and which fraction is smaller. Hope this was helpful. Have a great day.